Welcome to Face the Nation. I'm Leslie Stahl. This is the nightmare America is waking up to this morning. At least 76 United States Marines were killed, another 100 wounded, when a truck carrying 2,000 pounds of explosives ran into and pulverized their headquarters at Beirut Airport. The driver of the truck crashed right into the lobby of the headquarters in a kamikaze-style suicide strike. 19, possibly as many as 100 French soldiers were also killed. A massive rescue operation is underway, with the Marines who escaped the bombing working frantically to dig out the survivors. President Reagan flew back to Washington from Augusta, Georgia this morning.
I think we should all recognize that these deeds make so evident the bestial nature of those who would assume power if they could have their way and drive us out of that area, that we must be more determined than ever that they cannot take over that vital and strategic area of the earth, or for that matter, any other part of the earth.
The president held an emergency National Security Council meeting at the White House. What response is he planning? We'll ask Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger and other officials. The Marine massacre in Beirut, an issue facing the nation.
From CBS News, Washington, Face the Nation, with White House correspondent Leslie Stahl.
Secretary of Defense Weinberger is right now at the White House speaking to us from the Roosevelt Room. Mr. Secretary, you've just left a meeting of the National Security Council. What response is the Reagan administration planning in light of the deaths of all these Marines this morning?
Well, of course, the immediate reaction here is one of enormous sadness and great outrage at this act of senseless terrorism, which is very similar, perhaps perpetrated by the same people, to the attack on our embassy some months ago, in which, again, many of our countrymen were killed by an act of violence and senseless terrorism that has pervaded this whole Mideast area. I think we all sense that, have that feeling very, very strongly. There's also, of course, a full-scale attempt to find out just who is responsible, and that investigation is underway. We also, of course, now are looking at ways to reduce the vulnerability of the Marine Force, and obviously, because this was a battalion headquarters, we have to have a new location for that.
But what about a response? President Reagan said at his news conference the other night that we would not stand idly by and have our Marines brutalized.
That certainly is true, and that is part of the agenda this morning, and trying our best to find out exactly who was responsible. And we have had evidence, some circumstantial evidence presented, and I think some of us have our own views as to the responsibility. In a larger sense, you have to look at the fact that the whole reason that the Marines are still there is because we've not been able to get Syria to agree to a withdrawal agreement. We have not been able to get Palestinian organizations to withdraw. Israelis have said they would withdraw if the others did, and they have withdrawn part way.
Am I to assume that no reprisal action has been planned as of this point?
No, you can't assume anything. The meeting is not over, and there is a great deal of discussion about what would be the suitable and the best things that should be done. And as I say, many of us have our own ideas as to responsibility, although it is early, and the evidence, for example, that I've seen is largely circumstantial.
When the president spoke on the lawn this morning, he made a veiled reference to whom he thought might be responsible. It sounded a little bit as though he might be blaming the Syrians or even the Soviets. Is that what's in your mind?
Well, as I say, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence, and a certain amount of it points toward Iran. But there are so many elements, so many different groups over there that have made threats and have sent warnings about terrorist activity of the kind that they plan, that obviously we're looking at everything and looking at it very carefully. But the important thing is, of course, to conclude, I think, that the settlement of these matters in the Mideast is absolutely vital. It's quite clear that this kind of anarchy and terrorism can continue unless there is a very strong action taken to try to get at the root causes and get peace in that region, which is enormously to our interest and to the interest of the free world.
Mr. Secretary, you say Iran. We think maybe that it is the government of Ayatollah Khomeini on its own or in conjunction with other countries, possibly Syria?
Again, as I say, it is very early. There is a lot of circumstantial evidence, but certainly there is much that points in the direction of Iran, just as there was much that pointed that way in connection with the embassy. There are other elements there. That's one of the problems in Lebanon, is the number of disparate elements that are there and have made these threats.
Is there any possibility that we will be beefing up the Marine contingent there, adding to its force?
Well, you have to look at what the mission is, and the mission of the Marines has not changed. The mission was to try to get a secure area for the withdrawal agreements, which we hoped would be entered into, and that's one of the things that we find most unfortunate, that Syria has not agreed and apparently will not agree thus far to any kind of withdrawal, and that's an absolutely fundamental necessity before we can get peace in that region. And they were there to protect and ensure an orderly withdrawal, and that mission has not changed. I don't think that adding to them, adding to their numbers, will help them perform that mission. The important, difficult thing is that they're in a very dangerous situation, and it is necessary to try to take all the steps we can to decrease their vulnerability and decrease the risks that they face.
I assume that we're going to leave them there. There's no talk of pulling them out then.
No, there's just talk of trying to get some kind of better position for them. Our commitment to the cause of securing a peaceful Mideast, of course, remains, because it's absolutely vital to our national interest, and it's absolutely vital to the interests of the free world. We can't simply leave the area to terrorism or to whatever Soviet involvement there may be in connection with the Soviets' assistance to Syria, which is another very destabilizing factor in the whole region, and one that adds greatly to the danger of it, one that makes it quite clear that we can't simply walk away. But we can try to perform our mission in a way that reduces the vulnerability of these Marines.
What are your plans to reduce the vulnerability? Are we going to add to the naval forces around in the Mediterranean?
The naval forces are a very significant part of both our commitment and our ability to protect the people ashore. We have very substantial naval forces there now, with the availability of a carrier and with the battleship New Jersey, which is one of the most powerful ships in the world, and with a number of other ships. And there certainly is consideration being given to making sure that that capability remains, and it itself can be used to help protect the Marines in a very substantial way.
Mr. Secretary, are you convinced in your own mind that the Soviets had nothing to do with this?
No, I certainly am not. The Soviets have a huge presence in Syria, and a growing presence, a presence that I think Syria will come to regret if they haven't already. And the Soviets love to fish in troubled waters. So we don't have any conclusions at all as to the matter. I was just sharing with you some of the circumstantial evidence that we have seen thus far.
When you say that the Soviets might possibly have a role in this, it doesn't seem that this was aimed specifically at the Americans over there as much as the multinational force, since the French were also involved. Who stands to gain the most by pressuring that multinational force to leave the area?
Well, elements that want the state of anarchy or the state of total disarray to continue until perhaps their own faction could prevail. And that's why, because it is aimed at the multinational force, and the French have taken terrible blows. That's why it is essential that we obviously do anything that we're going to do in full conjunction and full coordination with the multinational force. And that's why we don't make any final decisions, obviously, here this morning, because we're just now in consultation with some of them. The French defense minister has been on the phone, and we are continuing to discuss with all of our allies in that multinational force what is the best way to fulfill that mission. And of course, the mission can be best fulfilled if Syria would agree to withdrawal and take the PLO with them, and the Israelis would pull all the way out, as they have agreed to do when the others make that withdrawal agreement.
The administration will obviously come under enormous pressure to pull the Marines out. There's already considerable public opinion in support of pulling them out. You have been quoted as saying you think they should come out. Have you changed your mind personally, and are you now fully committed to keeping this contingent of 1,600 Marines in Beirut at the airport?
Well, the whole question, as I said, of how we protect the Marines, how we reduce their vulnerability, and how we enable them to carry out their mission are some of the things that are under review by us, by our allies. None of this has any possibility of reducing the commitment that we have all made, so far as I know that we all continue to feel, has to be kept to bring peace to this region so that we can get Lebanon back on its feet as a sovereign nation. A great deal's been accomplished already, and the Lebanese armed force is under, with our training and our equipment, is growing in strength every day, and it's a unified force. It's the only force really in Lebanon that does include all of these groups. So there isn't any suggestion of withdrawing or changing that commitment. What we're looking at are ways that it can be performed in a better way, and ways that can reduce the vulnerability of the Marines as well as the other members of the multinational force. But the goal remains the same, and the commitment is unchanged, despite this horrible tragedy. And it's just a further reminder of the kind of world in which we live, and how dangerous it is, and how much risk there is in everything we do. And when you ask about the Soviets, yes, they have contributed enormously to creating that kind of a tension and instability in the world by building up that huge military force of theirs, which requires a response to maintain deterrence.
Thank you, Mr. Weinberger. I know you have meetings to go back to, meetings all day at the White House on this tragic incident. We have a late report from the Pentagon that the death toll among the U.S. Marines in Beirut has now risen to 120. We'll be back in a moment with continuing coverage of this tragedy. Joining us now are Dr. Rafiq Jouajadi, the Syrian ambassador to the United States, George Ball, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations in President Johnson's administration, and Senator Joseph Biden, Democrat of Delaware, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Ambassador Jouajadi, did your government have anything at all whatever to do with this tragic bombing this morning?
Leslie, I was preparing to come here to respond to your request to interview me about, I suppose, the crisis of Lebanon when I heard this tragic incident, which you called incident. It is much more. It fills us all with a lot of grief. The Marines are our brothers, no matter how different, perhaps, are the opinions about their mission and about their performance, and we regret that very, very, very deeply. And I would like to offer my sincerest condolence to the families of the people who lost their lives. If you ask me about Syria, I would tell you that Syria went into Lebanon in the first place under so much pressure, so many fervent appeals to stop this kind of thing, to stop the civil war. And today's incidents add to the ever-swelling number of victims. And if you ask who benefits, you ask the pertinent question to Mr. Weinberger, who benefits by this? Of course, the one who benefits by this is the one who is interested in seeing the Geneva conference. It happened at the eve of the Geneva conference, fail. The preparatory committee which issued the agreement among all warring parties, among their representatives, to have Geneva agreement, to have the conference of Geneva. Their their decision, their resolution, the basis on which this conference was going to meet was very clear: to remake the unity of the Lebanese, to finish with the foreign troops, to end the presence of the foreign troops, and to have to restore the sovereignty of Lebanon, and to have one united Lebanon with a strong central government representative of all. The ones who committed that is the group or the people who are not interested in seeing this, who are interested in the partition of Lebanon and in the perpetuation of the civil war.
We will have more questions for you, Mr. Ambassador, but first, Senator Biden, do you think that the administration will come under enormous pressure now to pull the Marines out of Beirut?
Well, I think the pressure will continue. I was one of those who thought we made the mistake in the first instance, but I think what the administration ought to be doing right now is what they are doing, and that is being very reflective about where they're going to move next and not make any rash judgments relative to anything, including pulling out.
Mr. Ball, Mr. Jouajadi questions who stands to gain the most by pressuring the United States government to pull the Marines out. It does seem to be an action designed to do that. What do you think is behind this, and who do you think is behind
Well, I'm
this?
not at all sure that it's so much designed to persuade the United States to pull the Marines out. Actually, it was an attack on the French as well as on the Marines. It's an action by any one of a dozen potentially disruptive forces in Lebanon. What it really illustrates, it seems to me, was the folly of putting our Marines in the first place.
Yeah, but can we pull them out right now or not?
I think that's a question of the diplomatic skill, and I think it's not a decision that can be made overnight. I would certainly hope that they can be pulled out, but I think that can only be done by quiet discussions with the other forces involved, the French, the British, the Italians, by consultation, among others quietly with the Soviet Union, by discussions with the various elements in Lebanon, and by some effort to substitute some kind of UN force or something of that sort. But I share Senator Biden's very strong view that let's not make any snap decisions. I was a member of the Executive Committee, the EXCOM, that advised Senator Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We took a week to make that decision, the final decision. Some of us were meeting the other night who were participated in this, and we agreed that had we made the decision within 24 hours, we would have made the wrong decision. Time is terribly important here, and I hope that the President and no member of the government says anything that commits us to any kind of action, whether to stay, to leave, to do whatever, until this has been thoroughly thought through.
Mr. Jouajadi, you talk about who would like to partition Lebanon. Of course, there are many Americans who think that Syria would like to partition Lebanon.
Yes, those many Americans have a prejudiced outlook, and they are brainwashed by a lobby, many lobbies, whose identity you know, Leslie, very, very well. You have been asking Minister Weinberger once and again, is Syria responsible? He didn't, perhaps you wanted to provoke him into give him more details about what he knows. Syria is not interested in partitioning Lebanon. Syria went into Lebanon to ensure its sovereignty and its independence. And it is not true that Syria doesn't want to withdraw from Lebanon. Will you please not interrupt me?
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
It is not true that Syria doesn't want to withdraw from the Lebanon. Syria has always said it wants to withdraw her forces when the sovereignty, the independence, and the unity of Lebanon are assured. But now it would not withdraw when the Israelis impose an agreement under duress
But aren't you
on the Lebanon.
trying to delay and delay and
We
delay?
are not
These
trying to
President
delay
said
at
so at his
all.
news conference.
The President said so. The President, we respect the President. Why are you involving the President? I'm a diplomat. A credit to the President.
Let's hear from
I
Senator
owe him
Biden
respect.
for a minute.
I am one of
Excuse
those
me.
people who believes that that Syria has not a great desire to leave. They've been asked to leave by the Jamal government. They've been asked by the Arab League to leave. All the Arab League said if the Jamal government asked, they would leave. The Israelis have agreed to leave. Everyone else has agreed to leave. The party that has refused to leave, however you ever characterize it, are the Syrians. And that is the crux of the matter, in my view.
Well, I don't hold any brief for the Syrians in this, because I don't think they behave very well either. But I do think that it was a tactical mistake on our part to try to negotiate an agreement with the Israeli and then present it to the Syrians, and I think to that extent we made a mistake. That doesn't mean that it doesn't excuse the Syrian position
Mr.
today.
Ambassador, you call the U.S. Marines your brothers. Do you want the U.S. Marines to stay in Beirut?
That is up to your policy. It is
but would you like to see it?
question of policy. If you say you want to protect, I hope the Marines would stay. If they are to protect all the Lebanese, not to protect one faction or to
But
side
would you
with
like to
one
see
faction.
them stay there to not protect, but to ensure that the Lebanese government under Amin Jamal maintains its sovereignty?
We have accepted the multinational force, perhaps as Mr. Wall said, if there were other nationalities, they would look more neutral. But Syria has accepted the multinational forces. She has not voiced an objection.
Senator Biden?
I hope I will comment upon what you said. You seem, Senator, to give categorical question about Syria's refusal. Do you agree that Israel has put conditions and you have made an agreement under duress to infringe upon the sovereignty of Lebanon, and that's why we cannot withdraw until we assure that?
I do not agree with that. I agree with the point.
Then our disagreement.
Our disagreement relates to whether or not there is, you asked who is to gain. It seems to me clearly that I'm not suggesting the Syrians are responsible for this, but I am suggesting that the withdrawal of the multinational force, the collapse of the Jamal government, and the de facto partition of Lebanon, the Syrians stand to gain. And that is something that is...
Do any of you think that the Soviets are involved in wanting to embarrass us, say, for example, in response to what we did on the Korean airline?
On the contrary, I think that they would not be very pleased by this kind of situation, because after all, there are 7,000 Soviet troops in Syria, and they're within 50 miles of the Marines. I think the last thing the Soviets want is a confrontation with us.
Gentlemen, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you for being with us. In a moment, a summary of the latest information we have on today's tragic events in Lebanon. With us now is David Martin at the Pentagon, our Pentagon correspondent. David, what are they telling us now about casualties in Beirut?
Well, the latest figure, as you said, is now 120 dead. Another 45 wounded have been evacuated. They say here at the Pentagon that they hope the number of 120 dead is the final death count. However, there is some expectation that some of the more critically wounded among the Marines will unfortunately add to that death toll. The 45 who have been evacuated, the wounded, is not the final count on wounded, because another C-9 Navy aircraft is en route to Beirut Airport to pick up more wounded.
And where are they being taken? Are they being taken to the ships in the Mediterranean, or where?
They're being taken to a number of places. The 45 that have been evacuated so far have gone to a British hospital on Cyprus and to an American military hospital in Wiesbaden, West Germany.
Mm-hmm. David, you heard Secretary Weinberger tell us that they're going to try to take steps to make the Marines who remain there less vulnerable. What kind of options are they discussing at the Pentagon?
Well, I thought it was interesting because he said we have to see about getting a better position for the Marines. To me, that means either greatly expanding the area you have now by sending out patrols to secure a larger perimeter, or else moving the entire Marine detachment to a more secure area, which presumably would be on higher ground.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for being with us with this final update. And thank you for being with us. I'm Leslie Stahl. Have a good week.
Face the Nation with White House correspondent Leslie Stahl was produced by CBS News, which is solely responsible for the selection of today's guests and topic. This broadcast originated from Washington, D.C.